Welcome! This is the second video in the DSP tools series. With this second video, my goal is to showcase some assumptions that are made in the DFT and the problems that arise when those assumptions are not respected, namely leakage. This tool can also be used to show the lossless property of a DFT and the fact that all information we really need is resolved, it is bound by the frequencies below Nyquist. Right, we have multiple graphs. Again, the top one is a time signal. I am using, again, a 1 Hz sinusoid sampled at a frequency ratio of 8 Hz. Below, I have, again, a spectrum, but this time I am also showing the phase of the spectrum, so phase information and amplitude. Since I am sampling my signal at 8 Hz, half of that is the Nyquist frequency, and this is what you see here. I am only displaying my spectrum all the way to 4 Hz. This is the normal convention when you're looking at real signals. The information on this spectrum here, it is all we need to perform an inverse Fourier transform, and that will hopefully help us understand the leakage phenomena. As I mentioned, this is a 1 Hz sinusoid. If I take the blue samples and do a DFT on them, I will have below the resulting spectrum. So I see that I have one sample at 1 Hz. Here's the phase of that sinusoid, and the other spectral lines have 0 amplitude. Seems funny that for a sine wave, the phase here is minus 90 degrees. Normally, if you do the maths, you would see that for a DFT, the 0 phase component is actually looking like a cosine instead of a sine wave. So this will give you a amplitude of 1 with 0 phase. So the same amplitude that you see here is the amplitude that you see on your spectrum. Let me reset that. Now let us perform an inverse Fourier transform, and to do that we will use this other component that you see on the right. In this case, to do an inverse Fourier transform, we only need one of those components. The idea is that I have a summation of all of those components in this yellow curve. So if I change the amplitude of this particular component, you can see the yellow curve changing amplitude as well, because again, the yellow curve is just summing the amplitudes of all of these components. On the spectrum, you see that now that I changed the amplitude of a particular component, I have it also shown here. So I already matched the amplitude of this component to my spectrum, right? And I will also match the phase of it. And I just did an inverse Fourier transform. From taking the information of the spectrum, I reconstructed my time signal by recreating these time signal components, namely the 1 Hz components, to reconstruct my original signal. Well, actually not my original signal, as in the analog signal represented here by the red curve. This is ultimately gone. When you do a measurement of an analog signal, you are taking samples which are represented by the blue dots, and anything in between the samples is lost through time. If you didn't measure, if you didn't capture it, it is gone. We cannot measure a continuous signal, right? We take samples out of an analog signal. Okay, nice, but this is just simple. Let's make it a little bit spicier. I will do that by changing the frequency of the original curve. Let's make it 1.3 Hz. So now this red trace is representing a sinusoid of 1.3 Hz. And why did I choose 1.3? Well, because it doesn't neatly fit within my observation window. That means that the signal doesn't wrap around cleanly. The end here doesn't match the beginning as it does with a 1 Hz signal, right? This end here is matching the beginning, so this is what we call a periodic signal. When we have a discontinuity between the beginning and the end of the observation time frame, meaning that the observation time frame doesn't fit an exact amount of cycles of a particular sine wave, like in this example for 1.3 Hz. in a 1 second window, the signal gets cut off partway through a cycle. So the signal ends at a different point than it is started, and this is no longer periodic. Bear in mind that, well, this is also not a periodic signal, although it is starting and ending at the same exact amplitude. The observation window still doesn't encompass an integer amount of period for this particular signal. Okay, so this is also not a periodic signal. And why do I want to show you a non-periodic signal? Well, look at the spectrum it gives us. Looks fun, you know. You won't see a clear peak at 1.3 Hz because you don't have a spectral line at 1.3 Hz. My observation time is 1 second, so that gives us a frequency resolution of 1 Hz, meaning that we'll have one spectral line, one DFT beam at every other 1 Hz. So 0 Hz, 1 Hz, 2 Hz, and so on. Since 1.3 Hz doesn't line up with any of those bins, its energy gets spread across the nearby frequencies instead of showing as a neat, sharp peak in the spectrum. Well, that's kind of intuitive, right? If I don't have a spectral line here, the energy gets distributed. Okay, so let us do an inverse Fourier transform. Using the spectrum information, I will try to line up this component to my spectrum. Start with the 1 Hz, align the amplitude, align the phase of it. Now I will introduce the 2 Hz component. Here it is. I am matching the amplitude. Now I am matching the phase. And on the top graph, you can see that, well, the yellow curve is matching very closely to my samples in blue, right? But there is still a gap. And well, this is where it became clear to me doing this exercise of why leakage happened. You can try all you want to describe the original signal by the 1 Hz and 2 Hz component, but you will never get a perfect match between all of these samples. When you use a non-periodic signal as an input to a DFT, it will still work, it will still produce a spectrum for you, but you are violating the assumption that the signal that you are inputting into your DFT is periodic, and that's why you have this leakage. The good part is that the energy of your input will be bound by the spectral lines close to the frequency of the original signal. So I have a signal of 1.3 Hz, and you can see that the highest amplitudes are indeed close to that frequency here, and the other frequencies are lower. But to be able to reconstruct your original signal, your original samples, you do still need to use this other component. Let us do that. Let me match the 3 Hz component. Let me match the 4 Hz component. And the final component is the DC level. You can see that there is an offset through all of the samples. This is the 0 Hz. I can bring them close by together. Well, close enough. And that is it. I think of the Fourier transform is, I guess, nothing more than a curve fitting algorithm. If you have a periodic signal, then you have a very good fit where your spectrum will showcase sharp spectral lines. Each frequency will be bound by one single bin, and so on. But let's face it, with real signals, vibration, and sound, it is very difficult to really get an observation window, or observation frame that has an integer amount of period for the signal that you are measuring with. So you will almost always have this leakage problem happening on your spectrum. That means that you cannot, trust the amplitude you see here to be exactly the amplitude you have on your original signal. Especially in this case, my original signal is 1.3 Hz. I don't even have a 1.3 Hz component in my spectrum. So this is one of the limitations of the algorithm. It is still very useful, and you can even mitigate this problem by conditioning your signal before you calculate the spectrum by applying something like a Hanning windowing function to your signal, and that will mitigate the leakage. But well, that's a subject for another video, another time. Anyway, that is it, I guess. Thanks for watching.